Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, we're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally as important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else. Not in the media and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Welcome to Illinois Rising. I'm Pat Hughes of the Illinois Opportunity Project, filling in as host for the great Dan Proft this week. And joining me is a friend and a colleague of mine, Jacob Huebert. Jacob is senior counsel, the Liberty Justice Center. For listeners who may or may not know this, I'm the president of the Liberty Justice Center, and Jacob's an outstanding lawyer and a terrific guy. And I want to welcome you back to the program. Thanks for being back.
Yeah, always happy to be here.
Jacob, a topic that I love to discuss, this is, I think, the third week in a row I've been on the show, either as a host or otherwise, but it's so prevalent in what's going on in our state, is this ongoing battle between Governor Roeper on one side and the Republicans and AFSCME, which is this large municipal union. It's the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal employees. It's not just municipal, it's government employees. And they're arguing over the contract that hasn't yet been set for these folks. And the AFSCME folks want some unbelievable amount of benefits. They want additional pay. They want less hours. And they want the taxpayers to pay for it in a state that's, $200 billion in debt. They want the state to pay for it. And it's $3.5 billion, I think, is the increase.
Yeah, it's amazing. These people are some of the best paid government workers in the country already. These people already make more money than their private sector counterparts. These people already get to retire earlier than everybody else, and they're still demanding more from the rest of us. It takes some nerve to do that and to kind of hold up the entire state government because of these ridiculous demands.
Yeah, and joining us is another good friend of ours, the Vice President of Communications at the Illinois Policy Institute and a friend of the program, Diana Rickert. Diana, thank you so much for being on the show. Hi, Diana. Thanks for being on the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So we're here talking about AFSCME, one of your favorite topics. Diana wrote an op-ed. She has one every month in the Chicago Tribune. She wrote an op-ed this month about AFSCME and the negotiations and their demands. Diana, give the listeners your sense of what's going on in this struggle, and what Jacob's kind of covered what AFSCME is asking for, but sort of what is the sort of battle lines, and what do you think the outcome might be?
So AFSCME is kind of like Cookie Monster, right? AFSCME wants more and more and more and more, and they don't seem to understand that Illinois is completely out of money, that we have a backlog of bills that's almost $8 billion long, and that we need to get our finances in order. So they've been agitating with Governor Roeper for more than a year, trying to extract more benefits, more salary increases, increases in health care costs when the state really doesn't have that money, and they're angling for a strike. Some people say that there could be a strike of state workers, people at the DMV or maybe in social service departments or agencies, but there could be a strike as early as September 1st. One of the things I noticed about the way AFSCME is discussing this issue is they keep trying to make their whole fight about the quote-unquote middle class, and they want to stand with union brothers and sisters from all kinds of labor unions, and they're trying to preach the virtues of solidarity. So in this month's column, I took a look at, what does that solidarity really mean? Are they really peers with union workers in the private sector, in different kinds of unions like they claim?
Yeah, and so here's really the rub, right? And we're going to talk about this a little bit in a later segment as well. There's this notion that AFSCME and other state employment unions like it, SEIU or others, wants to wrap themselves sort of in the flag of the working middle class in the state. And that they're fighting for the benefits of those people. And the Democrats, Mike Madigan and John Cullerton, they paint it that way too, right? That we're fighting for the middle class and trying to grow our economy for those people. And AFSCME and SEIU are sort of the markers for how that gets done. But the reality is very, very different, right? Isn't it, Diana? That what's really happening is the middle class in the private sector, whether you're a private sector, union employee or just a private sector employee or a small business owner in the middle class, they're the ones bearing the brunt through property taxes, through income taxes, through workers' compensation costs, through all sorts of other sort of hidden costs to living and doing business that are bearing the brunt for AFSCME's outrageous current contract and this $3.5 billion demand that they're making.
Absolutely. And so when we took a really close look at the AFSCME contract and compared it to some of the private sector union contracts in the area, the difference was startling. Like everything from not just their pay and how many raises they get but also like just how many days off they get, how many holidays they get, or what kind of vacation time they get. It's all supersized. It's all way out of line with what people in the private sector, the folks who are paying these salaries and benefits, are getting.
Now, in your column, you make a point of distinguishing what public sector unions get and what private sector unions get. Why is it so important to distinguish between those two types of union? Because I think a lot of people just lump unions all in together. Why do you make a point of separating them out like that?
So this is crucially important, and for me it's actually personal because I have a number of people in my family who belong to private sector unions. When they get lumped together, it's unfair because the benefits that the government union workers get are far and above, way better, more luxurious than anything that the private sector union workers will ever get. So people need to have the right understanding of what they're paying for and what they're not paying for, and understand that there's Cadillac-level benefits being handed out to government workers that are unheard of in the private sector. It's not a union thing. It's a government union thing. And so, for example, paid days off. AFSCME workers get 13 paid holidays, including Black Friday. Private sector union workers in Chicago, construction workers, plumbers, electricians, carpenters, pipe fitters, they get 6. And they only get those days paid if they actually work on the holiday. So if you're actually working on Christmas, you get Christmas paid. Otherwise, if Christmas falls in the middle of the week, you have a 4-day paycheck. You don't have a 5-day paycheck, and certainly not a time and a half double time paycheck. And when it comes to pensions, everyone says, "Oh, we need to protect pensions." Well, pensions in the public sector for AFSCME workers are completely supersized. They're nowhere close to what a construction worker or a private sector laborer is going to get. And so people have to understand that we're not talking about union or pension. We're talking about government union, government pension, and they are not the same. And I can tell you based on personal experience that people who belong to private unions do not like being lumped in with the government guys. They're nowhere close to the same. They do different jobs. They have different training. A lot of government union workers went to college. They work in offices and white-collar jobs. You've got, there's going to be a heat wave these next few days. It's going to be 95, 96. The private union guys are working outside in heat when it's 95 degrees outside. They're not the same at all.
Diana Rickert, Vice President of Communications at the Illinois Policy Institute. Great article, Diana. Thank you so much for the work that you do, and thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, Jacob, Diana did a great job, sort of distinguishing between a private sector and a public sector union. And for the listeners, here's what, in my view, what the difference is and why the public sector unions get what they get. They are in bed and in business with the people who make the laws and negotiate these contracts, right? So AFSCME, SEIU, these are the financiers and the foot soldiers of all of Mike Madigan and John Cullerton's legislative campaigns for State House and State Senate. And so, when it comes time to negotiate these contracts or pass laws that relate to this, this is how they got this stuff done. And everybody was asleep at the switch because there was nothing anyone could do. And really, so it's really just a pay-for-play circumstance. And then in 2014, Governor Roeper came around and was sort of the fly in the ointment, right? He came and said, well, this is ridiculous. This isn't how you can negotiate a contract. There's no way we can pay these types of increases in benefits and in salary given the finance states in, particularly because it's so outside of what, regular folks out there who are paying the freight in terms of taxes are getting. And he said no. And that's sort of where this fight is coming from.
Yeah, and when you have a private sector union and a private sector business, there's an adversarial relationship there, and the employer has to negotiate based on keeping the business's costs under control and things like that, so that they can reach something that's mutually acceptable. The public sector unions in Illinois have never had that situation. They've had somebody across the table who just wanted to give them everything with no concern for the cost because they could pass it all on to taxpayers. And now they're dealing with a situation where you have somebody who actually does want to keep costs under control to some extent, and they can't handle it.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I mean, it's not going to ultimately play out until the General Assembly is made up of different people. In my view, that in my private life, I'm a Republican. Like I say, in my view, that's more Republican legislators to fight against Mike Madigan and John Cullerton and the powers within these unions. When that ultimately changes, and you still have someone like Governor Rauner in office, that's when I think this can actually be improved, and the circumstances surrounding that for the rest of the economy can be improved as well.
Yeah, and it's important for taxpayers to understand what's going on here, because in the media, you don't necessarily see it framed up this way. The people who write about this don't necessarily understand how we got into this mess and what needs to be done to get out of it. And so it could be very confusing unless you sort out these issues as Diana has for us here.